Okay, welcome everyone. We have a special seminar today. I'd like to kick off with acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which our research infrastructure and community operate across Australia, and pay our respects to the elders past and present. We recognise the connection they have to the land, sea, sky and waterways for tens of thousands of years. Okay, a big welcome. Thank you everyone. So we've been very lucky to have Arnau, who's been visiting New Zealand. We've invited him to present at a nice Australian-friendly time today. I'll quickly pass over to Leslie to give a full introduction. I just wanted to give a shout out to say that we do have a really broad group of participants today. So welcome everyone. Arnau's going to give a 60-minute seminar and then we should have plenty of time for questions and discussion afterwards. I'll just ask if everyone can turn their mics off during the session. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the 20 minutes. If you would prefer, you can log them in the chat as we go, and I'll try to keep track of those as well. Okay, thank you everyone. I'll pass over to Leslie. Leslie Wyborn's a long-term member of our community. She's currently representing AuScope, but also has activities with NCI and ARDC and is a friendly face to many of ours. Leslie, over to you.
Hi everyone. Look, thank you for coming. And as we're warned, I know we have a diverse audience with people interested in data compute, and a shout out to some people who are here from the Department of Education. As you know, I wear many hats. But I think the proudest hat I have is that I am actually on the Science Advisory Board for ChEESE Phase 2. And I previously was on the Industry and Users Board for ChEESE Phase 1. And I just think this is one of the most fantastic solid earth projects I know of. If I put my science hat on, when I listen to the presentations that Arnau makes, which are at terrible hours of the night for me, sorry Arnau, I just find the resolution and the scale at which they're doing their modelling and the parameters, it's just getting really close to real world, above which there's the speed at which they're doing the model. I put my compute hat on, I just go, wow, that they're taking codes that I can remember a decade ago we had in MATLAB and, you know, simple desktop things like that. And now they've got them running on the tier 1 and shortly will be running on the tier 0 systems in Europe. But above all, if I put my data science hat on, that's when I really start to panic and worry about it, because this is serious compute and they can do it at very detailed scales. And I look at a lot of our data sets that we have in Australia and just think, oh my God, how are we going to be able to get them to be able to be used in these systems? And that's where, thank you to ARDC, AuScope, NCI, you funded the 2030 geophysics project. We're actually kind of grappling with that. And ChEESE is, if you like, one of the Pathfinder projects that we follow. And so without much ado, I'll hand over to Arnau, and I hope you enjoy the work that they're doing as much as I do. I just think it's fantastic. So take it over, Arnau.
Okay, thank you very much, Leslie and Rebecca, for the presentation and for inviting me to give this seminar. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'll try to make it in 1 hour, and then we can have so that we can have enough time for questions. Also, just to start with, just one slide about me, just to introduce myself. My name is Arnau Folch, and I'm currently a research professor at the Spanish National Research Council, at the CSIC. And I have been also for more than 15 years now at BSC, which is the National Supercomputing Center in Spain. And currently I'm the coordinator of 2 big initiatives. One is ChEESE, which is the one that I will introduce to you today. But there is another one that runs in parallel with the second phase of ChEESE, which is DDGeo. And I will also briefly introduce this other big initiative that we have in Europe. And at the same time, I'm also a member of the scientific advisory board of the Destination Earth initiative. So this is about what I plan to tell you today about this presentation that I have divided in 4 main blocks. One is to give a quick overview about which is the situation, the current and the future situation in European on the HPC ecosystem. Then I will explain you about the first phase of ChEESE, so ChEESE-1P, which results we got during the execution of this first phase of the project and what we learned from it. Then I will focus on the second phase of ChEESE, which is a project that has recently started the 1st of January this year, which objectives we have and what we can expect for this second implementation phase. And then how everything, let's say, links and synergizes with the future of the digital future in geoscience in Europe. So let's start with the first phase. You probably know that in Europe, we have what we call the Euro-HPC joint undertaking. This is a very big initiative between 32 European countries that have joined their efforts in order to develop and deploy all an ecosystem of supercomputers in Europe, confederated supercomputers. And apart from this hardware side or this infrastructure side, the joint undertaking also aims at ensuring that this research infrastructure is used by scientists and also by industry, And for this, they are also putting a lot of attention in developing skills, training, and other things that I will explain you. This is a big initiative. Euro-HPC has a budget of for this 7 years period of around 7 billion euros. So that's a substantial amount of money, And it is articulated around underpinned by three main pillars: infrastructure, applications, and technology. Infrastructure is about deploying machines. And during the last few years, there have been a lot of investment on that. They have deployed already 2 tier 0 pre-exascale machines, the Lumi and Leonardo in Finland and Italy. And then in Spain, we have Mare Nostrum 5. So that's the 5th generation of the Mare Nostrum supercomputer that is going to be deployed very soon in the next, in this spring probably. So you can see the numbers here. We are talking about machines of several hundreds of petaflops. We are not at exascale yet, but almost. So for example, Lumi and Leonardo were the 3rd and the 4th machine in the last top 500 list. In parallel to that, Euro-HPC has also deployed a number of tier 1, what they call tier 1 machines. So that's petascale machines, and you have some of them here in different countries. So that the idea is that to have a network of different typologies of machines, And then there will be 2 bigger machines, the exascale machines, to come probably in 1 or 2 more years, one in Germany and the other one in France. So this is about infrastructure, but then we have the applications. And here, this is a long-term, let's say, initiative that started back in 2016 with, at that time, the setup of what they call the centers of excellence. So there have been, you can see here, several calls since that time to fund centers of excellence. So the first call funded, if I'm not wrong, 8 centers of excellence. Then there was a second round of funding opportunities, and here is when ChEESE-1 was implemented. Then we have now this year a third call with 10 COEs, and here it is ChEESE-2. And in parallel to that, there is also what they call the national competence centers, which essentially are national scale versions of Euro-HPC that try to attract local industry and other typologies of local users to these machines. Okay. This is the list of the current COEs, the 10 COEs that we have today, started now under the umbrella of Euro-HPC. And as you can see, the domain of application is very diverse. So we have centers of excellence on astrophysics, on plasma simulation, on fluid dynamics, on biomedicine, engineering applications, different topics. And what I will focus today is about ChEESE-2, which is the Center of Excellence for Geosciences. Then the third pillar in this ecosystem of Euro HPC is technology, and this is also substantial investment of money for the next 4 or 5 years to design, build, and make deploy the first European supercomputer based exclusively only on European technology. Okay, so there are 2 projects, EUPilot and EUPEX, that will design prototypes for this first version, probably based on ARM and RISC-V accelerators. And then there is another initiative that will start in next year that is called FPA. That's the acronym for Framework Partnership Agreement for Open RISC-V, that will try to deploy in 3 or 4 more years the first operational post-exascale computer based only on Open RISC-V technology. So that's also a substantial investment in order to guarantee the European sovereignty or the digital sovereignty. So that's to give you let's say the big picture where all these centers of excellence frame. And now I will show you in a few slides share with you the experience that we had in ChEESE-1, which results we got and what we learned from it. No. So ChEESE, the first implementation phase of the Center of Excellence for Exascaling Solid Earth, started in November 2018, and that was a project that was supposed to last for 56 months, so that's 3 years. But because of the COVID pandemics and several issues that we had a 6 months actually extension, so it lasted until April, May last year. Okay. And the first phase of ChEESE was a consortium composed by 13 partners from 7 different countries. And what motivated us to start with ChEESE was that we had identified what we call at that time exascale computational challenges. So that were problems that we couldn't solve yet in geosciences with the machines that we had at that time, only 4 years ago. And we identified in terms of what we call capability computing, capacity computing, and urgent computing. I think that is interesting to understand this because when we talk about exascale, most of the people, most of the COEs want to reach exascale using capability. That means use these large supercomputers to solve problems that you cannot fit in your current machine. So that's to solve, let's say, monolithic problems when you do one single run and you solve a very large problem that cannot fit in the memory or in the size of your computer. Okay, so that's one way. Of course, is let's say the main way to that, or the main concept by which people refers to exascale. But we individuated, and we were also very aware that also in geosciences we can use these very big machines with quite different approach, let's say, and one is capacity computing. So here in this case, maybe we don't have a very big monolithic program that fills the full machine, but we can have what we call exascale workflow. So that's maybe a collection or a series of problems that have to be run together for many reasons, because we run data simulation, because we want to solve an inverse problem, because we have an uncertainty quantification problem. For a number of reasons, we can reach also exascale, but as a workflow, not as a single monolithic run. And then in the case of geosciences, this new concept at that time emerged, which is urgent computing, in which, okay, there are cases in which we can already solve the problem with what we have now. I'm talking now back to 2015, but not with the time constraints that an emergency situation poses to us. So maybe we had a time limit. We have to, I don't know, we have to solve, for example, take the case of tsunamis, the tsunami wave propagation problem. We have to solve it in less than 1 minute, because then we have to give an early warning and evacuate the people before the wave reached the shore. No, so that was the case. Of course, we could at that time already solve the problem, but maybe not with the time constraints that the emergency situation required. So with this in mind, we started ChEESE-1 with several objectives in terms of science, application, services, and community building. And we wanted to address these exascale computational challenges that we identified. And for this, we committed to prepare 10 open source community European codes for, at that time, the upcoming pre-exascale machines. and use these codes together with workflows to implement what we call a pilot demonstrator. So that were a smaller scale proof of concept in which the codes and the workflows were tested. And these pilots had a clear objective in terms of solving a specific problem or enabling a service normally oriented to society or critical aspects of geohazards, okay? And then in terms of community building, it was clear also that we wanted to integrate several key partners in all this. So not only supercomputing centers and academics, but also industry and especially civil protection and public governance bodies. So we selected 10 codes. You have the list of the codes that were in ChEESE-1 on 4 different domains: in computational seismology, in magnetohydrodynamics, in volcanology, and in tsunamis. And what you see here, the scalability level in 3 colors, 1, 2, and 3, is the strong scalability that we had at that time with the codes when we started ChEESE-1. No? So as you can see, at month 0, at the starting of the project, the level of the codes was quite heterogeneous. So some of the codes, particularly in computational seismology, were already quite good in terms of scalability. So they were at petascale. It means that when we started the project, they could already scale very well up to 10 to the 5 cores, for example. And I put cores here and not nodes because at that time, very few codes were accelerated. So we didn't count the scalability in terms of nodes, we did it in terms of cores, okay? A couple of more codes were at level 2, and the codes in volcanology and tsunami were at the lowest level, they were at level 3. It means that at that time, they already had scalability bottlenecks at around 1,000 cores, okay? And the strategy that we adopted was, okay, there was in parallel another center of excellence called POP for performance optimization that was very useful for us because essentially they helped us to audit the codes. And we started with the first audit round that highlighted which were the bottlenecks of these codes. And then based on the results of the audits, we did an on-purpose code preparation and optimization. And then when the project was already reaching to an end, we did a second audit run and used the same metrics as a KPI to compare how the code was or had been improved during the project. No. This is the different things. What you have here is the columns represent the different codes, the 10 codes that we had in ChEESE-1, and then the different activities that we did to these codes, depending on the results of the audit. No? So activities could be porting to accelerators, for example, as you can see. 8 of the codes were ported. Codes 1 and 2 were already semi-ported when we started the project, but the rest no. So we did porting to all the codes to accelerator. Some of the codes had bottlenecks in communications, others had bottlenecks in I/O, in parallel or asynchronous I/O, others in vectorization, memory use, etc. You have the list here of what we did with all of the codes. No? And the nice thing is that at the end of ChEESE-1, all the 8 codes, it says 7, but it's actually 8, were already fully ported or substantially ported to GPU environments, essentially NVIDIA, but some of them also AMD. Apart from that, we did a collection of code that is on Zenodo. We wanted to improve this a little bit more, this aspect of the code collection in ChEESE-2. But in ChEESE-1, what we have is essentially a repository of code that acts as a hub where you can access and download and the codes, the workflows, and the different things that have been developed in ChEESE. No? And this includes the codes, but also software, metadata, etc. And we did also an important effort about code inputs and outputs so that everything is interoperable and, let's say, fair-like and compatible with the EPOS catalog. For example, for the case of volcanoes, so some of the data sets that were generated have already been integrated in a thematic code service, the TCS in EPOS, and for that you need to put your data in a certain format and use some metadata that is compatible with what EPOS requires. No? Then a part of the codes, we also had what we call the pilot demonstrators. You have here the list of the pilot demonstrators in different areas in computational seismology, tsunamis, volcanology, and magnetohydrodynamics. No? So we have these 12 pilots. And what you have here in this table is the evolution of the technology readiness level of these pilots. This is a kind of indicator that goes from 1 to 9. 9 is fully operational, and 1 is just defined at a concept level. So you see here the evolution of the 12th pilot in time from the starting of ChEESE-1 to the end of ChEESE-1. And when the KPI means what was our target when we started. No? So for example, if you take pilot number 2, it started at TRL 3, it finished at TRL 9, which is very high, and the objective was 7. So it went even farther of what we expected at the beginning of the project. Then all the pilots that reached the TRL equal or larger than 5 were also, let's say, further developed in order to enable service prototypes, HPC service prototypes on different aspects. On UC, it's urgent computing, on early warning systems, or on probabilistic hazard assessment. So that's for generating a hazard map for earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanoes. We also did quite substantial effort for running these pilots on large scale, and we were very lucky that we were granted also with several other projects that allowed us to run some of the pilots really at scale. You know? So you have some examples here. For example, we could run Pilot 1, which is on urgent computing for earthquakes, using 3,000 nodes of Mare Nostrum 4. That was, we were lucky here because there was a stop maintenance of the machine, and we had the opportunity to run the full machine that at that time had around 100,000 cores. So that's one example, but we have other examples. For example, for tsunamis, and they also did a very nice capability simulation using Marconi 100. It's a machine that is in Cineca in Italy, running the pilot with 800 nodes. That's using over 3,000 V100 GPUs. That's a quite substantial number also of resources. Then Leslie has already mentioned one of the, let's say, successes of ChEESE was the co-involvement of what we call the industry and user board. So that's an aggregation of, let's say, stakeholders or people that was monitoring the project, that is companies, associations, other projects. So it was quite diverse, most of them in Europe, but of course we also had others from international or from other places. Now, for example, here in Australia, we had AuScope and NCI. And this was very useful because some of these IUBs helped us to co-design some of these services and also to validate the services in operational setups. No? So this is, you have here just some of the examples of some institutions that were quite active. As you can see, it's quite diverse. We had like meteorological officers for offices like the Norwegian or the Icelandic, or civil protections in Italy or in Spain. For aviation, air traffic regulators in different countries. So it was quite diverse depending on the case. No? But they were quite, let's say, quite important because helped us to tailor what we were doing to the final user. No? So we could run with these 14 use cases that you have listed here. So you have for each of these pilot demonstrators that went to a higher TRL. So these are 8 pilots out of 12. The different cases that we could run for tsunamis, for earthquakes, or for volcanoes, essentially. You know? Some of them are exercises, or there are producer data sets, and so on. So I will now show you some of these use cases, and also some live exercises. Live exercises, the difference with use cases and live exercises. Use case is to run the pilot on full scale. And live case is more or less the same, but it's more kind of blind test. So it's something that the end user imposed to us even without knowing anything. So we were running the pilots on real time without knowing what's going to happen, and was the stakeholder, for example, in this case was the Civil Protection of Italy or others that were telling us, okay, now an earthquake has happened here of this characteristic, and we had to provide, I don't know, with ground shaking maps or whatever, depending on the pilot, but was kind of blind for us. We didn't know what's going to happen actually. And we were running with maybe less resources or not on full scale. So I'll show you now a few examples. For example, one example for PD1, which is on urgent computing, and this one we run here a kind of blind test and an example for an earthquake in Turkey, for example. No, so that was the demonstrator. This is a nice workflow because actually it has let's say received data streams from different seismic stations, and then decides whether detects the occurrence of earthquake, does disambiguation of signals, processes the signals, then decides there is a kind of intelligence layer that decides whether this is an urgent computing case or not, because you cannot stop or you cannot use all the resources for every earthquake. So there has to be some characteristic above certain magnitude or affecting a certain number of people or located in a given geographical area. So there are constraints, no? And so if all these things were ticked, then it's an urgent computing case, and then you trigger the workflow, you send everything to the HPC system, you retrieve the results. So it's a kind of complex workflow. But yeah, the idea was from the data stream to these maps that you can see here on the bottom right, that went quite just in the same workflow. For the tsunamis, more or less the same. So we did a couple of use cases with the European Emergency Response Coordination Center. That's the kind of the association of the different civil protection agencies, European civil protection agencies. And we also did a case for with the Spanish civil protection as well, for simulating a tsunami in the south of the Mediterranean. We did live exercises also here, using up to 68 nodes of Marconi 100, which is a machine in Cineca in Italy. For PD6, which is about a probabilistic volcanic hazard assessment, we also participated in exercises. We did probabilistic hazard assessment for Campi Flegrei volcano, both in the short and in the long term. And also for a volcano in Norway, in a remote island that is called Jan Mayen, that's in quite far north. No? And we did also some live demonstration with Plinius and Aristotle, which are what kind of agencies that depend on the Italian civil protection. For example, in this case, what you see here, we did this has a map that were done mixing on real time. This is for short-term hazard assessment. It means that we run 300 scenarios all at the time, on real time, I mean, synchronously. And then based on that, we perform a short-term hazard assessment. So that's what we did in this case. So we were just in a live exercise, so the civil protection was telling us, okay, now there has been an eruption of these characteristics here, and we run the scenarios and we deliver the maps using the required resources. More or less similar for PD12, but this is about more civil aviation oriented, because here what we do is ensemble-based forecast of volcanic ash clouds, and this is of interest to civil aviation because they want to prevent encounters, in-flight encounters with ash clouds. And then here we also, as you know, there are the volcanic ash advisory centers. There are 9 of them around the world, and we collaborated with the Buenos Aires BAC and also with the London BAC in several exercises where we also ran this pilot on real time. So we did several demonstrations with them. So this in particular, this pilot demonstrator reached a TRL, a technology readiness level of 9, which means that was really tested in an operational mode, no? And this is true, and we were also I was gonna say the word lucky, but the thing is that when this pilot was more or less ready, it happened that the eruption of a volcano in La Palma in the Canary Island in Spain occurred. And that was very timely because this was almost ready, and we set up this pilot in collaboration with the Spanish Civil Protection Agency and the Army to do the daily forecast. So during November to December 21, we were running this daily in an operational mode to provide, in a real case now, results daily to the Emergency Management Committee, and that is called PEVOLCA. And yeah, decisions on airport closure or evacuation of people were really effectively taken in real time, in reality, based on in part on the results of this pilot. No? There was another pilot also, PD2, that also is being exploited operationally. It means that it's currently running, and this is about tsunamis. And this is run by AGN, which is the Spanish Geographic Institute, and also by Aristotle, which is a kind of interface of the Italian civil protection that delivers results also to the ERCC. This is the European Emergency Response Coordination Center. So this is where we are when we finish ChEESE-1 in terms of grand challenges that we have addressed on services. So what you see here is the standard top 500 plot, let's say, where you see the evolution of the performance of the top 500 supercomputers over time, from the 90s to the present, more or less. And for example, the yellow curve in the bottom is the average of the top 500. So you have here the performance of the average of the top 500. And what you see in green is which were the requirements of the service that we implemented in ChEESE, and in purple, the different grand challenges or the different really large problems that we were able to run. So as you can see, we are already in a position where, of course, we didn't fill the top one machine, but well, we were quite high in terms of gigaflops or petaflops. So in summary, just to summarize, ChEESE-1 was a project that was, let's say, sustained on three main things: codes, pilots, and services. And for codes, we prepare 10 codes using two pop audit runs. The first one to identify weaknesses of the codes and highlight where should the codes, or where should be more effort to improve the codes. And the second run was used as a kind of checking that the metrics of the audits were really improving after all the development. I didn't mention that, but we also use a kind of mini apps for co-design. So we had some of the codes also had mini app versions for co-designing with some hardware providers. And 7 of these codes were ported to GPUs, mostly using CUDA, but some of them also OpenACC. Then in terms of pilots, we implemented 12 pilots, and we raised the TRL of all these pilots from between 2 and 6 points, to an extent that up to 8 of these pilots were able to be enabled as a service. And this was also, we were also, let's say, lucky to have the opportunity to apply for resources and be awarded with over 2 million of core hours thanks to several praise projects and national also projects. So we had a substantial number of core hours for testing and running the pilots during these exercises. We could also run, thanks to these 5 large-scale test-bed simulations, both in terms of capability and capacity. For example, in terms of capability, we could run one of the pilots using up to 3,000 Marinostrom 4 nodes. And in terms of capacity, the tsunami pilot was able to run with using over 3,200 GPUs on Marconi 100 machine in Cineca. Then we further tested on these services in collaboration and in co-design with some members of the IUB, to the extent that even 2 services weren't really operational and were used in real emergency management cases. Apart from that, we also did this collection of codes, and we did a quite substantial effort for data standardization. For example, this is one of the things that we started to do in ChEESE-1, but we will stress more in ChEESE-2. And we were also awarded with the Galileo conference that will be held in May this year. And we enlarged the IOB, the Industry and User Board, up to with 32 members. We started with 12, if I'm not wrong, and then we were adding more and more IOBs up to 34 at the end of the project. So that is for ChEESE-1, and we'll show you now in brief ChEESE-2, which are our objectives. And ChEESE-2 is essentially another project that will last for 4 years. So that it started now in 1st of January this year and will last for 4 years. It has a budget of around 8 million euros. Okay. And it's funded under Euro HPC. So we are, let's say, Euro HPC is our funded funding agency. The consortium is more or less the same that we had in ChEESE-1 with some variations. Unfortunately, we could not include the Swiss partners because they are not at Euro-HPCs or anymore. So we could not have in ChEESE-2 ATH, which was the Swiss partners, but we enlarged a little bit the consortium with some new partners, and we are now 16 beneficiary organizations, so essentially 16 partners from different origins. We have 4 tier 0 centers, so that's BSC, Cineca, HLRS in Germany, and CSC, which is the Finnish supercomputer center that is hosting Lumi, now the top 3 machine in the world. We also have a couple of private companies, Vulatos and NGI. We have institutions that are tasked with operational geophysical monitoring, like CSIC in Spain, INGV in Italy, IMO, the Icelandic Meteorological Office in Iceland, and ChEESE in France. And then we also have a substantial number of partners from academia and science, let's say. The driving concept of ChEESE-2 is exactly the same that we had in ChEESE-1, is the exascale computational challenges that you have here. But we enlarged this a little bit with in order to include in ChEESE-2 also geodynamics, that we didn't have that. So remember that in ChEESE-1 we had 4 areas: computational seismology, tsunami modeling, volcanology, magnetohydrodynamics. And now we added geodynamics and also one pilot to model glaciers. So this is something also new, no? But this is the list of the challenges that we want to address, and whether they pose a challenge in terms of capability, of capacity, or urgent computing, or both. So depending on the case, we can have one or 2 options. The general objectives of ChEESE are, first, well, we want to consolidate what we did in ChEESE-1 and really become an effective hub for geosciences in HPC. Okay. We will, let's say, enhance 11 codes. Now we have 10, now we have 11 codes, and continue with the preparation of the codes to achieve even higher performance, etc. An important commitment that we have also in ChEESE-2 is that we want to do continuous integration and continuous deployment in the Euro-HPC machine. So this is a requirement of our grant agreement, that we will have to, let's say, have this DevOps approach to the code, so that any user of the machine has the codes already available in any machine when they log in, and they have a containerized version of the code that can be deployed and run in any of the Euro-HPC machines. So this is a requirement of Euro-HPC. Then we will farm a new generation of 9 pilots. We had 12 first, now we have 9. Most of them are different to what we have. I will explain later what happened with the 12 pilots, because some of them went into operations, some have been transferred to other projects. I will explain you in a few slides, but we have now 9 new pilots that will allow us to run, we expect, like around 15 simulation cases that will address these exascale computational challenges that are at the base of what we want to do, no? And let's say the idea of the pilot is the same. It's to enable services on geohazards, in particular urgent computing, early warning, and hazard assessment. The new thing here is that there is now something quite new at the edge in Europe that was not there 4 years ago, which is Destination Earth. It's a major, very big mission-like initiative that we have in Europe. And ChEESE will try to align and synergize with this project a lot. I'll explain you later how everything, let's say, fits. This is the new list of codes. Some of them were already in ChEESE. As you can see here in the column, some of them were already in ChEESE-1, so this is a continuation, and we will continue to prepare these codes. Other codes are completely new. So, for example, Tandem for computational seismology, other codes for volcanology, the codes in geodynamics, and the code to model glaciers. They are completely new, so we'll start from scratch preparing these codes. We will do more or less the same strategy, do a first audit round, see which are the weaknesses of the codes, and try to define a strategy for the preparation, acceleration, and so on. This slide try to let's say summarize which is the difference between ChEESE-1 and ChEESE-2 in terms of codes. You can see on the left that ChEESE-1 had 4 areas, and the list of codes. The codes that you have in red are codes that have been discontinued for several reasons. For example, Salbus, because belonged to the Swiss partner that cannot be anymore in the consortium, so this code will be not under the umbrella of ChEESE-2. And other 2 codes have been, let's say, discarded for different reasons, but the rest of them are still in ChEESE-2. And in the column of ChEESE-2, what you see in green are the codes that are new, mostly in geodynamics and glacial hazards. More or less the same for mini apps. I mentioned briefly before that we have 4 mini apps in ChEESE-1, but now we will have much more mini apps because ChEESE-2 will have a major, co-design will have a major influence in ChEESE-2. No? So this is the new list of pilots addressing different aspects. I don't have time, unfortunately, to go into detail, but I will share with you the slides and you will have the description of all these pilots. No? And this is what happened with the pilots that we had in ChEESE-1. Some of them went into other projects or initiatives. Some of them are more or less continued in ChEESE-2. And what you see here in green are the pilots that are completely new in ChEESE-2 with respect to ChEESE-1. This is the list of simulation cases that we want to address in ChEESE-2. As you see, it's quite ambitious. We have capability cases, capacity cases, and we also identified what we call scientific SGC, that's scientific run challenges. So that's really large scale runs that we will try to run if we have access, as we had in ChEESE-1, to full scale runs in pre-exascale machines. The expected outcome that we have for all these simulation cases is quite diverse. Many of them are open data sets that will be integrated into EPOS, but others are services that urgent computing services, probably under the umbrella of EuroHPC, but also under the umbrella of some thematic core services for tsunamis and volcanoes in EPOS. So you can see this is in brief the different simulation cases, so the different places where we want to apply and run the pilots at scale, okay? And as you can see, most of them are in Europe, but we also have others outside Europe, in Greenland, or for example, we want to do a full-scale simulation of the Tonga event that we had occurred exactly 1 year ago. So this is a nice one because it couples almost everything. So volcanoes, earthquakes, and tsunamis, and it's a quite challenging multi-physics and multi-component pilot. No? Some of these pilots, let's say, that cover different areas. So they are becoming, in ChEESE-2, pilots are becoming more multi-scale and multi-physics that were in ChEESE-1. And in terms of services, we will also enable several services on probabilistic seismic hazard assessment, on modeling of tsunamigenic scenarios, on volcanic dispersal in the atmosphere, or in simulation of phreatic volcanic eruptions, for example. And we also aim at having 2 services integrated in EPOS as thematic core services. That's some data sets that we will produce. In particular, we want to do a global TEFRA hazard map, a global tsunami hazard map, and an European TEFRA hazard map, so at scale. So that's a high resolution map that we will put in EPOS. This is just to show you differences between ChEESE-1 and ChEESE-2, but I think that I have already more or less mentioned everything here. Yeah. Yes. So that's a bit the objective that we have for ChEESE-2 that is started a few weeks ago, and this is what we have in May, no, on mind. But before ending, I think it's worth showing you in a few slides what happened, or what is happening in Europe, because in geosciences, we not only have ChEESE, we have now an ecosystem and a myriad of projects that is quite impressive. And many of them actually are using what the developments and the results of ChEESE-1. No? So if you see here the evolution in time from when ChEESE-1 started to what we have in EFURA, which essentially is destination Earth operative around 2030, more or less. The EuroHPC exascale machines already deployed by 2028, 2028. EPOS also not only as, let's say, covering data, but also providing services, ACSD and integrated cost services or distributed services, okay? And what we develop in ChEESE, some of the results, for example, some of the pilots that had high TRL went into another initiative that is called GeoEnquire. Some of the simulation codes are used by DDGeo. DDGeo is another project for developing the digital twins and for its integration in Destination Earth. Some of the workflows that we did in ChEESE went into another EuroHPC large initiative that is called eFlows for HPC, in which they are developing software stack for workflows, and they have a pillar on natural hazard. And then we also, some of the results went into EOSynergy. EOSynergy is another very interesting project that has just finished now, but I know that they are preparing a proposal for having a second phase of it. And it is about automatic, fair, and validation of data sets and software and services. I will explain you in a couple of slides. Let me introduce you first Destination Earth, because this is probably the largest initiative that we have in Europe, if not in the world. I don't know in the world, but in Europe for sure in geosciences. Around 2 billion euros for the next 8 years to deploy a digital twin of the Earth. Okay, so that's a digital twin actually composed by several digital twins of the atmosphere, of the ocean, of the land, lithosphere, etc. And the idea is that at the end, all these twins are coupled, if possible, and operative. They have already started with 2 twins, one on climate change adaptation and one on extremes from meteorological extremes. But then there are 4 more projects in the pipeline that have also started this year: DTGeo, BioDT, Intertwin, and Iliad, to prepare prototypes of other digital twins, in, for example, the geo and digital extremes, that can potentially be integrated in 3 or 4 more years into Destination Earth. No? So DTGeo is the first of these, and the idea here is to deploy a prototype of digital twin for geophysical extremes, and by this we mean deploy different components of this twin, that each of these components will address specific hazardous phenomena from volcanoes, tsunamis, earthquakes, or even anthropogenic seismicity. Okay, and we want to do this also in let's say in alignment or in interoperability with all the data universe of EPOS. Okay. And also using the EuroHPC and the Phoenix research infrastructures. And the idea here is also to verify before the implementation operational these digital twin components in different site demonstrators that are of particular relevance, most of them in Europe. No? Another, I mentioned this project before. This is a project called EOSynergy that has finished 3 weeks ago, actually, but that will probably have a new phase starting this year, in which they have developed, let's say, quality, a set of software tools for software services and data quality. You know, for example, for software, they have a software quality as a service that you can download and run, or you can also run it through their. They also have it web-based, so you can run it offline. And it is a kind of platform where you can pull data from your open repository of software, GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket, whatever you have. Okay, you just go to this page, put the link, put the branch that you want to do, and they perform a series of checking about the quality of this software at very high level. And quality in the sense that they don't tell you if the model is good or bad, of course, but they tell you if the licensing style is good, if a series of requirements that they have to set in order to, let's say, put to score and rank your code, no? And based on that, you can get a badge, a silver badge, sorry, a bronze badge, silver badge, or gold badge, depending on how well you do what they consider to be the best practices, no? And this is nice because if you get this badge, you can also go straight to a register of codes that have obtained the badge, and this is a kind of seal of quality, no, of open source code. If you have your code in this repository of codes. they also have what they call FAIR EVA. It's a FAIR evaluator. This is also a nice software tool that measures or puts a number also to the fairness level of your data. No? So they have also for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable different skill scores. And depending on that, well, actually they look at your metadata, not your data, but if your metadata fulfills all the requirements, and you also get a badge if it is the case, no? The idea that we have in ChEESE-2, of course, is to work in collaboration also with this initiative. So, for example, all the codes that we will deploy in the HPC machines will have to have a badge before their deployment in the machines, and also all the data sets that we produce will have to be FAIR evaluated before that. No, in particular, before they transfer into EPOS. Okay. I already mentioned that too, but there is another big project that is GeoEnquire that is taking profit of what we did in ChEESE-1. And GeoEnquire essentially is a project that has started in November last year, which will give or already have a portfolio of many virtual and transnational access. The difference of virtual and transnational is that one is virtual, as the name indicates, and the other one is a physical one. So any scientist can have access to a series of data sets and services, either virtually or going to a specific place. This is the case of a lab or whatever, some place that where you have to go to be there physically to do whatever you do. No? And one of the things that they have here, you can see maybe the logo here, is a kind of ChEESE as a research infrastructure. So several of the ChEESE codes are already integrated here in this big initiative that is GeoEnquire. And also some of the workflows as we did are integrated as workflows as a service as well. So to summarize, because I think it's more or less three now, or just few take-home messages for you, is that Europe has a very rich HPC ecosystem, in particular after the establishment of the Euro HPC joint undertaking a couple of years ago, that is sustained on 3 pillars. And one of these pillars is, let's say, a kind of permanent funding to sustain a number of centers of excellence. One of these centers of excellence is ChEESE, is the Center of Excellence on Geosciences or on natural hazards. We had a first phase of ChEESE that ended last year that was underpinned or based on 3 main concepts: codes, pilots, and services. And services includes also the co-design of the service in operations in collaboration with several members of the IUB, the industry and user boards. We had a number of pilot demonstrators. Some of them reached a quite high TRL, even 9, and even went into operation in real cases, like, for example, in the case of the volcano pilot in La Palma eruption. And I think that it's clear that ChEESE-1, the first phase of ChEESE, was quite successful in fostering, let's say, the transfer of results and the synergies with many other initiatives, to the extent that actually there is a kind of ecosystem of projects like DTG or GeoEnquire or AuScope, which is the second phase of EOSC, that are using all what we did in ChEESE and are, let's say, taking what we did in ChEESE-1 to another level. And then in ChEESE-2, we will focus in other aspects, because, for example, the operational part, we cannot commit to do that. So this is transferred to other institutes or to other projects. And in ChEESE-2, we want to retain what we consider that is our niche, which actually is HPC and the codes, the preparation of codes. So we have already kick off the second phase of ChEESE, expanding the number of domains to incorporate more areas like geodynamics of the modeling of glaciers. And we will mostly focus on codes. We will also have pilots, but not the running of pilots at an operational level. This is not our objective. Our objective is to prepare the codes, to prepare the pilots, to enable the service, and then transfer the result elsewhere, okay? And the last point about ChEESE in Australia and ways of collaboration. And we're open now to start thinking about if you're interested in what we do and learn each other, one from each other. There are initiatives in Europe, for example, for collaboration between European projects and other countries. So there is the possibility to apply for or to have calls. For example, I know that there has been a call for establishing in HPC. I mean, for establishing or for having a project with Brazil, with Japan, with who else? Mexico. So we could explore whether this is possible to have a kind of share call for HPC in geosciences between Europe and Australia. This is one possible option. Of course, then there is AuScope and MIPOS and the memorandum of understanding and many other things where we could consider. And that's it. I think I leave it here. Thanks for your attention and open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. It's kind of blown away with the scale of quite a lot of the pilot demonstrators and just the idea of stopping compute to get the timely results is just amazing on that scale. I'd like to throw over to some discussion. We can make some concluding remarks, but we've got about 25 minutes. So we did have a question from Kerry. Leslie, did you want to add anything before we go to questions?
No. I'm just glad to hear you were blown away from it, because now you know how I feel after an industry and advisors board or the science board. I'm just blown away by what they're doing.
Yep, it's great. It's really good. I'll throw to Kerry. Kerry's from the Australian Research Data Commons and was involved in putting together a report for the new planet-themed Research Data Commons here in Australia. So just as some background for you. Go for it, Kerry, if you don't mind asking the question.
Thanks. Yeah, no, happy to. Thanks, Beck, and thank you so much. That was a brilliant talk. My background is absolutely not HPC and big scale analysis, but so I'm really interested. A couple of slides before the end, you had a diagram of sort of the collaborations, the different levels. And you had ChEESE down there and different infrastructures, and you talked about the research community having input through. I'm wondering about the mechanisms of that research community input. Are they research societies, or are they what sort of organizations, and how do you manage that?
For the IOB, you mean, for the industry and user board?
I'm not sure. No, yeah, well, that's one mechanism. I was just wondering which slide I have to. I haven't actually opened up the slides there.
Okay.
It was just a couple before the end.
Yeah.
Probably 48.
Before the end.
Yeah. Keep going. What, maybe one before? Oh, okay, maybe it wasn't right as far as the end as I thought.
Slide 48, I think, is the one she wants. Is that the one you want? Or...
no, it looked different. It doesn't matter. Yeah. So what other ways? So formal user advisory boards. How do you select the users that go on that?
Listen, we do it just based on let's say anyone that was interested, to be honest, and contacted us, and with that was possible to establish a faithful collaboration was like accepted. You only had to sign a memorandum, an NDA, an undisclosure agreement, and that's it. And then the IOBs, we more or less try to keep them informed about the developments. Unfortunately, our original idea in ChEESE-1 was to have at least a couple of meetings with all of them, but then pandemics happened. So ChEESE started at the end of 2018. So after just 1 year, we had the lockdown, we had the pandemics, and we have been able to travel until the end of the project. So this was quite not as good as we wanted, no? But the idea in ChEESE-2 is that, okay, you have this potentially monitor what you do, and it depends on let's say on the, if you want to involve size and they want this, I would like to do an exercise with this and that. Some of them were very things. That's it. So there is no a formal way of doing. Was kind of a bit on the fly, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question from Tom Honeyman. Are you happy to answer, Tom? A question, sorry, to ask the question?
I definitely can't answer it.
Which is what you asked. Thanks.
Yeah,
Go
hi,
for it, Tom.
another AIDC person here, sorry, and my particular area is specifically concerns research software. So all my questions would be about codes, but actually from my worldview, I see software as two things. I see it as the source code, but also the people, and the people are a very important part of the infrastructure in this case as well. But my specific question was, the codes that were developed in phase one, or in ChEESE-1, sorry, I should call it, represent a substantial investment of time and money. I'm wondering if at this stage, if you have reflections on what factors influenced what you were able to carry over and what you had to abandon, and whether there were any lessons learned in that way. It might have just been research priorities. It might have been technical issues. I guess I'm more interested in that kind of what could you have done differently if you wanted to carry something over?
Well, it's difficult to ask because it's very code dependent, but it's true. It's a huge investment, and the main reason EuroHPC is forcing now the centers of excellence to have this DevOps approach. No, because what happened, for example, is that you invest money in a code, and then for some reason, it happened to us, for example, with Salvos, this code that was belonging to a university actually. They made a spin-off, and parts of the code were transferred to the spin-off. This was not open anymore, and it couldn't be under the umbrella of ChEESE because we have the requirement. We are funded by public we use public funds, so one of the requirements is all what we do has to be open and has to be accessible to the community. No, so this happened. This happened that one of the codes just went into a private company actually, and there was a substantial money that we invest from the public sector that then was there, and now it's not, let's say, at least not the full code available. Parts of it, yes, but not the full code, no? So this is a risk that you have. And then, yes, to recover. I think it's important that what we do, then it's not remain just in our offices, because it's very nice. Okay, I have a code that is in my institution that runs, that has been improved a lot. But then you need an extra effort, or you need to be very, let's say, aware that this has to be available to anyone that will use these machines. This is what EuroHPC wants, because they have the machine and they have the users, but then they also want to have the codes in many different scientific domains that can run performantly in these machines, okay? So this is also a message that what you develop, then you have to make it available to a wider public.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
That's, yes, of course. It's never going to be one thing, but yeah, thank you. That's a great answer.
I don't know if I answered exactly what you were asking, but I cannot think of.
Well, look, I could
Sorry?
keep digging, but I won't. I'll give space to other people.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. We've got a few more questions in the comments, and so I'll pass over to Gareth Davies. Gareth, are you comfortable asking the question?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
No worries.
Go for it.
G'day. So yeah, I was just wondering what range of programming languages the codes are using, and whether in the course of porting them to this very high-end HPC type problems, whether you learned particular lessons about the suitability of different approaches for that sort of realm.
Okay, most of them are C or Fortran. We also have Fortran in modern Fortran, Fortran in the last versions of Fortran. So this is what is, let's say, at least in our domain in geosciences, more common. We are having what you were mentioning with the Fortran codes, some of the problems in co-design, because when we are now starting to co-design with these new RISC-V accelerators and so on, and most of them, these people, when they start to develop, they do not provide that with Fortran compilers or libraries or so on. So it's mainly C oriented, and in some cases they have also Python, but most of them C. So, but yeah, we have Fortran and C, most of them. And then the workflows, it's very mixed. We started everyone more or less, or every partner had a kind of in-house workflow based on many different solutions, from a simple script to a more sophisticated Python script or whatever. But then we also did an effort to use a kind of unified workflow management system using more, let's say, more advanced orchestrators like PyComs or other ones. So there's a range of software stack, from the codes that use Fortran and C to workflows and many other pre and post-process tools that are based on many different languages, I would say.
Oh, that's really interesting. So if I understood correctly, what it sounds like, the Fortran compilers were not really up to some of the accelerators that were available. And so in that situation, what sort of solutions could you apply? No,
the Fortran compilers are not available for the prototypes of new, let's say, accelerators that the European Processing Initiative is preparing. So the RISC-V based. For what is already in operations, it's perfectly fine. So in all these Euro tier 0 and tier 1 machines, you have, I mean, you can run anything in Fortran or in C, or compile anything in Fortran in C without problem. The problem that we're having is to use Fortran codes for co-designing new architectures. This is the problem, because the hardware engineers, when they start, they do everything in C normally or in C++, and Fortran comes only after some time.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Understood.
Wonderful. Thank you. I've got one more question here in the chat, and then I'll throw it out. So if people want to put their hands up now, that's fine too. Tanya, are you comfortable asking your question?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for that presentation. That was really interesting. I guess I work for National Earthquake Alert Centre in Australia, and I'm more interested. So I have no background in HPC, unfortunately, but this was still very interesting. But I'm more interested in if you're at all able to comment on how some of your pilots, live exercises, and all the simulations that you ran in terms for earthquakes and tsunamis, how did they stack up against expectations? You mentioned you were working with civil agencies as well while you were running this. Like, how did they find it? Did they find it useful? Like, how long did it take for simulations to finish running? What sort of resolutions are you talking about? What inputs do you need for those codes, etc.? Are you able at all to comment on that?
Sure. Again, this is very pilot dependent, no? Because, I mean, once the pilot is in place, you can run it at full resolution if you have the resources and the time. So in the case of version computing, normally, if you have this time constraint and you cannot have access to a full-scale machine, which was the case, and for example, I give you a practical example. During the eruption at La Palma, we had to deliver this operational service to the PEVOLCA committee, so the civil aviation, no? And the Barcelona Supercomputing Center gave us, if I remember well, was not a huge amount for what is machine, few nodes of the machine, like 40 nodes or something like that, so around 1,000 cores, okay? And we had to deliver the result in 20 minutes, because this was the constraint. The simulation said, okay, I want to forecast every day at this time, and you have a 20 minutes time to solution. So with that, we just to try to fit the problem size, so that with those resources that we had at that moment and the time to solution constraints, we did our best. And so we adjusted the model resolution, and we adjusted the the different model inputs so that we could deliver in this time. But of course, if your time constraints are different or your resources are larger, then you can run it to a full scale, the pilot, right? So it's always a matter of which resources you have. And then about the feedback, I think that was quite positive. In particular, for the tsunami exercise was very successful, and it's implemented also in different institutions. And the volcanic ice also was quite successful. And was used in particular. We did simulations of volcanic ice dispersal and fallout in the island, in the proximal, and also for volcanic gases, right? And that was quite helpful for together with taking data in situ, because we were also, or they were also deploying some teams on the ground for measuring with stations the quality of the air and the level of toxicity of the gases. But that was quite helpful to know, for them to know where should they deploy these teams of people that were measuring, and depending on that, they were just taking out the people from homes and evacuating people from certain areas of the island. So it was a kind of, it's not just that you use this tool, but I mean, it's just a good support for the people on the ground, the people taking decisions during the emergency.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions? Please just raise your hand. I have a bundle, so if no one else has any other questions, I'll just start asking. Leslie, did you have questions?
No.
Okay.
You go ahead.
Yeah. So I just find the scale of the kind of operations really interesting. And I mean, so I suppose because of my position, I'm kind of interested in the workforce, like the people that are actually doing the work. Where did they come from? So how much, so this funding was obviously, was it a big increase in funding that you had previously? And how many additional staff did you need to do the coding and also dealing with the hardware? And where did they come from? It's, you know, were they postdocs?
This is a very nice.
Because I want some.
Okay, yeah. No, this is an interesting question. Yeah, of course, we started with our classical approach, let's say, in science, in which you have people from your institution, then you try, if you have the resources, to hire a couple of postdocs, but we suddenly, I mean, we soon saw that this was not enough, and that we had also to rely on more, let's say, skills and expertise that we don't have in earth sciences. So essentially trying to hire software engineers and people that comes from a different world. And the problem, to be honest, here in ChEESE-1, but especially now in ChEESE-2, is that it's quite difficult to find these people with the salaries that we pay in the public sector. And this is really difficult because even young people, they even just graduate people, the private companies offer them salaries that are twice what we pay, because our salary is fixed by law and we have no margin, or just a small amount, no? And we are not competitive in the public sector in terms of salaries. So this is becoming a real issue now in ChEESE-2 because we are committed to a lot of IT and technical work that our postdocs are not, I mean, are not their main skills, let's say. So of course we have some of the postdocs that were already in ChEESE-1 that have learned a lot, because we have done also a lot of training courses in the tools and in many different aspects. So it has been quite transversal, no? But yes, this is one serious issue, hiring IT people.
Yeah, we have the same problems here. So just checking that you hadn't solved it for us. No. Any other questions? Can we talk a little bit more about your suggestion of collaboration? So I think that's something that, like, I'm really interested in following up. So if there is anyone out there in the audience that is interested in pursuing like discussions or having a look into the code, is that something that you're open to having potentially? I'm not sure if workshops are the right name, but a kind of show and tell or a deep dive into some of those domain specific codes. I know we do have quite a lot of activity in some of those research areas here in Australia. Is anyone in the audience? Oh, sorry, you go, Arnau.
No, sorry.
No. Is anyone in the specific question for our audience, just to see if anyone here is interested in pursuing that, or you can contact me later if you'd like. Oh, okay. So yeah, Tom's interested, and he's also interested in how you set up the code to publish and how to publish the codes too. Tom, did you want to ask a specific question about that, or?
Yeah, no, I don't necessarily mean the specific workflow, but rather, I mean, it kind of intersects with what you were saying before, but like, how did you go about socially engineering the scenario whereby codes would be available publicly and in perhaps a standard way from the looks of things? You were doing it over the Zenodo community, which meant that all the partners and separate projects were actually agreeing, presumably, to do it in a similar way across the whole of the project.
I'm not sure if I got your question right. Sorry, it was a bit of echo, Tom.
Yeah, I'm interested in how you made the projects come together to agree or to acquiesce to publishing their code in a similar way.
Well, yeah, I mean, when we started, all the codes were already in repositories, but of course they were quite different. And we did an effort to do this Zenodo collection of codes, but this is not homogeneous. It's just kind of hub where you have links to the actual repositories. So we were not very successful, to be honest, in ChEESE-1 in this aspect. No, now in ChEESE-2 we have a much, let's say, stronger commitment for doing this, for passing this software quality assessment, for make everything more homogeneous. Because when you pass this, when you get this badge, it means that you do things in a certain way, following certain standards of coding, of licensing, of everything. So if you get a seal, if all the codes get this seal of quality, this badge, it means that they are more or less like kind of more uniform. And then we will deploy them in the EuroHPC machines. And I don't know exactly what solution we will adopt for other users that are not in those machines, no? Because I mean, we will do this deployment in the machines, but probably Zenodo is not the right thing, the right place for putting everything. And we are discussing still several options for how to do this, including giving, for example, the codes or simulation as a service through EPOS, for example. This is another option that we are discussing.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Leslie.
Arnau mentioned a couple of times in his slides. I've just put a link. This is an EGU Galileo conference, which are pretty high profile. And there's one on, what is it? Solid Earth and geohazards in exascale. I don't know any of Australians that are going to it yet, Arnau, but I'm just raising your awareness that this is on, and there's speakers from the Europe as well as from the US. So, you know, come on, Australia, let's get there.
Yeah, so if anyone's interested, no, that's fine.
If anyone is interested to come, is more than welcome. Just to let you know that the abstract, I think, was due by that weekend. So the deadline was already this weekend. But if someone wants to come, we can accommodate anyone later on. Let's say up to March, mid-March, something like that. Okay. So it's quite I mean, these are conferences that are promoted by the European Geoscience Union, EGU, and I mean, are not a standard conference. There will be talks and there will be posters, but it's not a standard scientific conference. It's a kind of more informal thing where you gather people that have some interest and and you gather experts on different topics. You put them in a table and you do discussions and you do split sessions and things like that. But the idea here is to kind of brainstorming and then write a kind of white paper and a roadmap for exascale and geosciences, at least in Europe. No, what we identify that should be done, which are the weaknesses, which are our strongest points, things like that. So it's a kind of more on informal discussion. So this is what I'm saying. Even if officially, if you go to the page, you'll see that the deadline was due by, I think, late January, if I'm not wrong. But if someone is really willing to come to Barcelona in May, just let me know, and we can make room for you.
Thank you. Leslie and I were talking about that conference last week, and it does look wonderful. So yeah, I'd really encourage anyone who's interested having a deeper look. I'll do one final call for questions, but I think we're probably finished. Can we all just give a virtual round of applause to Arnau? Thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's been a busy time for you. So in our chats beforehand, Arnau checked out of his official accommodation and drove 3 hours from Rotorua to somewhere this morning and managed to get online just in time for us. So that was much appreciated. Thank you. Also, I suppose just
fast. I was driving too fast.
driving. Oh, well, you got there in the end. I'll do a little call out as well. So AuScope has a few things going on that might help those of you who are interested in, high performance computing. So we do have a AuScope NCI partnership. So we do have some compute and storage allocation for our community. So please get in touch with me about that. Leslie and myself, and also people from the Geological Survey of Queensland, Janelle Simpson, we're organising MT with HPC and national data sets, a workshop in March up in Brisbane, associated with the AEGC, so the Australian Exploration Geophysics Conference. So if anyone's interested in that, please also get in touch. And also just about collaborations, if you're at all interested in pursuing this any further, please reach out as well. Yeah, and just thank you everyone for your time. We've had a really broad group here, and so it's been wonderful to see you all. I might throw to Leslie to see if she has any closing remarks as well. She looks happy though.
I've just been wanting to share this with Australia for the last 3 years. I know I've been writing to Arnau and saying, can we get you to come? Can we get you to come? And we finally did it. So I hope you see the value as an earth scientist. I just think what this project's doing is groundbreaking. And thanks so much, Arnau, because I know you're a very busy man. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, really.
Yeah.
Thank you.